I acknowledge that we're on land stolen from the Muwinina people, the original owners and custodians of this place. I pay my respects on behalf of the Greens to the Palawa Pakana and their elders who never ceded the island of Lutruwita to colonisers. Repairing the promise of a treaty with the Tasmanian Aboriginal people is pressing unfinished business. And I recognise the strong and enduring community of Aboriginal Tasmanians today who uphold law and practices, who continue to care for country and protect heritage landscapes that are shaped by tens of thousands of years of living. The Liberals have fallen into a shameful place of inaction. Since they've been in government, there have been no land returns. There's no effective protections for ancient heritage, even burial places, against the ravages of developments and four-wheel driving. Indigenous protected areas, the land tenure needed to hand over management of national parks to Aboriginal people has not progressed. Despite promises and a commitment to establishing a pathway to truth-telling and treaty, there's no legislation to start this process. Honourable Deputy Speaker, as well as a commitment to work for the return of more lands, effective Aboriginal heritage law reforms, an end to the destruction of ancient middens and burial sites in Takayna, and the creation of Indigenous land tenures, the Greens also commit to the consultation and community engagement needed to work towards truth-telling and treaty legislation. Ensuring that the truth of colonisation is told and delivering on a centuries-old promise should be the goal of this Liberal government, and the Greens will do everything we can to remind them of that. Honourable Deputy Speaker, for a decade we've seen Liberal politicians selling out Tasmania, its people and the environment. This government patted themselves on the back for years about delivering a golden age. But while big corporations and special interests lined their coffers, public services were starting to fall apart. A decade of Liberal neglect has had huge consequences. Everyone knows about the shocking state of our health system, the cost of living and housing crisis, the damage being done to the environment, the problems in education. With all that happening, what is Jeremy Rockliff's priority project in this budget? $1 billion stadium. That's Liberal priorities for you, and they're totally cooked. The Greens say things don't need to be this way and change is possible. We're proud to have developed an alternative budget. It's a plan that shows how Tasmania can do things differently. Our vision is to fund things that will make a positive difference to the state now and with an eye to the future. So we prioritise building more homes, taking real climate action, hiring more nurses and other health staff, valuing and protecting the environment, and providing relief to people struggling with costs of living that will actually make a difference. This might sound ambitious, but it's totally possible if we stop the stadium, make big corporations pay their fair share, and end the huge subsidies to native forest logging and the racing industries. It's time the Liberals got their priorities straight and started focusing on the things Tasmanians actually need, not $1 billion stadium. The Rockliff's government budget was an opportunity to respond with reforms that would change the direction of Tasmania for the better. Economist Saul S. Lake's assessment of the Liberals' finances points to their massive underinvestment of about $500 million a year in providing Tasmanians with the same level of public services that every other Australian has. The harms of a decade of their gouging money from the public service are so obvious for the people who rely on those services and our environment that needs proper protection. Honourable Speaker, the level of social disadvantage and real suffering among the majority of Tasmanians is hard to comprehend. Housing insecurity and the financial screws it's bringing are so extreme that 50% of Tasmanians are skipping a meal every day to cut costs. Across the public service, nurses and midwives are striking and resigning. They can't bear the pressure of working in a chronically under-resourced health system and the extra service cuts that they know are coming down the line in Minister Ferguson's efficiency dividends. And I want to thank on behalf of the Greens, unions like the CPSU, HACSU, ANMF, AEU and the CEPU. They're the voice for public sector workers who can't speak out without them. And it's thanks to them that the dire conditions of staff who are at breaking point and of the services that aren't being delivered are being told to Tasmanians. Their voice is powerful. This enormous social need could have been responded to in a meaningful and not a band-aid way. But instead, the Treasurer's delivered essentially the same budget that the Liberals have rolled out for a decade. It's a status quo budget. It means workers who are on their knees after a decade of starvation resourcing and who now have added efficiency cuts will get no meaningful relief. Honourable Speaker, there is no more urgent and challenging issue for Earth's inhabitants than checking our carbon emissions and preparing for the rapidly changing climate instability already with us. Over last month, the volatility of an overheated climate gave us just a taste of the extreme flooding and winds we know will get more frequent and serious, unless we end business as usual. Affected communities, and I know members here have been and spoken to the people in those communities, those people have been frightened, they've been disrupted, they've been in danger. The cost of recovery for them is enormous. The sacrifice of volunteers, of emergency responders, was enormous. We're in a climate emergency. Strong action is urgent. Instead of reining in the emissions that are feeding planetary heating, the Liberals are flattening and burning our native forests and releasing vast carbon stores every year. The uniqueness and beauty of these forests are mostly just used to make temporary wood chips, paper and cardboard. And the Liberals have promised to go in further and harder into the forests, all being paid for by taxpayers. The Liberals no longer have any meaningful climate focus. At a time when speed is essential, our state's emissions are rising across many industries. The Liberals have abandoned their post. Honourable Speaker, purposeful delay on climate action is the latest policy corporations employ, the ones that refuse to change business as usual and miss out on some profits on a dying planet. And the Liberals are willingly enablers of those industries' interests. And so the Liberals have dumped the Minister for Climate Change and the legislated soft guidelines for industry cuts, like transport, have whizzed by unmet. The government should be helping people prepare for much more extreme weather as the normal new state that it is. But they're still acting like each flood and storm is just a blip. And so that's why the Greens alternative budget invests in carbon reduction and storage through ending native forest logging and the enormous emissions clear felling and burning generates. We have emission reduction targets for all industries and we invest in the funding that's needed to roll this out. We focus on preparedness with 30 extra rapid response firefighters to stamp out bushfires in remote places fast and keep regional communities and wild places safe. We make sure there's funding for local councils to develop micro-local emergency networks for all residents in their communities so that every person can understand exactly how to prepare for hazards, how to protect themselves and be connected in post-event recovery. Honourable Speaker, renters in Tasmania are often caught in a cruel trap. People can't afford to buy a house, but they're left paying almost a housing deposit's worth of rent every 5 years. The Australian Greens have used federal agency data to reveal that none of the top 10 common professions in Australia can afford to buy a home and avoid housing stress. It is an absolute generational stain on us as a society. On the salary an average Australian primary school teacher or nurse collects, it would take them over 10 years to save a mortgage deposit. Wages are even lower in Tasmania, but unfortunately rent prices are not. Renters are acutely vulnerable in our community to price rises they can't afford and holding onto a secure home. In Tasmania, renters can be evicted without clause. Under the Liberals in government, there's no minimum standards for renting properties. People can cop massive rent increases at the whim of the homeowner because there's no regulations to control it. It's nearly impossible for everyday people to save for their own home. Renters are living under massive anxiety and cost of living pressures. And they're the lucky ones, Honourable Speaker. So too many Tasmanians are homeless or couch surfing because the public housing waiting list has over 4,500 people on it. Women are sleeping in cars with their children to escape family violence, and many more remain in abusive households because there's nowhere to go. In the first 3 years of the Liberals in government, they didn't build any new public housing stock. In the second 3 years, Airbnb boomed and thousands of homes were steadily lost from the rental market. And despite the brutal crisis in short stay that's been directly created for Tasmanians, the Liberals still refuse to regulate this sector. They're more focused on catering to the interests of property developers and investors, which they did in the budget, than to Tasmanians who deserve a secure home. That's why our alternative budget prioritises the investments Tasmanians need to drive down rents, and we regulate the short stay sector. And to match the urgency of the housing crisis that is all around us, we prioritise a massive infrastructure investment pipeline of $1 billion towards building 1,000 homes every year and $40 million in youth-specific accommodation. This is the scale of investment that housing insecurity, poverty and homelessness in Tasmania demands. This is where we should be spending our money, to support a construction jobs pathway for the future, instead of frittering it on the money hole of $1 billion stadium. That, Honourable Speaker, we've just found out today from the Macquarie Point Development Corporation submission to the Tasmanian Planning Commission on behalf of the government, that it's going to cost another $60 million more than they expected. It's only just starting, and now it begins. Of course, it was always a joke. It could be built for 715, $1 billion. Let's be real, $3 billion is the ultimate price tag that something like that would take to build. Honourable Speaker, the cost of living crisis has been brutal and it's getting harder for many Tasmanians. And for these people, trips to the supermarket have gone from being a bit of a headache to being a nightmare. Many skip meals every day. Paying the rent or the mortgage is a fortnightly feat. Power prices have gone through the roof, and trying to pay other bills is often impossible. People are struggling. This isn't what life should be like. The government has taken some modest measures to tackle the cost of living, and we welcome them, but they don't go nearly far enough. What about doing more for people in need? I think Liberal politicians would genuinely say that the government can't afford to give more on cost of living and that they've done the best that they can with the budget. Well, the Greens say it's about your priorities, and there is more money to give. So on top of their stadium folly, the Liberals' budget gives nearly $200 million in taxpayer funds to the racing industry. These are huge subsidies for a cruel industry, and it only benefits a tiny number of people. The Greens are proud to put forward an alternative budget that makes cost of living relief a major budget priority. Our plan would halve the cost of car registrations for struggling Tasmanians. We'd make public transport free across the metro and the regional bus and ferry network. We abolish public school levies for everyone. We bring down power bills by significant investments in solar, house insulation and double-glazed windows. We boost the food relief being provided by community organisations and neighbourhood houses. All of this is possible. It's just about your priorities. The Treasurer said on Friday that the government was very pleased with the public response to the budget, but then he acknowledged it's not possible to please everyone. I was at the TCCI's budget breakfast last Friday morning when he said that, and it couldn't have been clearer who the Liberals' budget is aiming to please. The business community in the room were very chirpy. The budget has multi-million-dollar handouts for property investors and developers. It's a pipeline for their construction wish list. There's nothing in this budget that challenges the profits of multinational corporations or gets them to tighten their belts. Under the Liberals, corporations continue to get our public resources for a song and budget incentives to boot. But in stark contrast around the breakfast table, the faces of people from community organisations who exist to support the most vulnerable and poor were desolate. Some had tears in their eyes, telling me of the dire situation their organisation faces after a decade of starvation funding under the Liberals, organisations who've been refused to even have a CPI funding over that period. New Tasmanians, who have never asked them for help before, are reaching out to their organisations every day. Two-income families who need help with food because they can't pay housing costs. TasCos's budget briefing later that Friday was more grim news. 3/4 of that sector are preparing to cut staff because of the Liberals' underfunding. Most have already started cutting services that desperate Tasmanians need. Honourable Speaker, the amount needed to take this sector from starving to well-nourished is pathetically tiny. The Greens choose to prioritise the $7.5 million a year over the budget period needed to give the community sector the indexation formula that they've been asking for. It's not much to help the people who do some of the most important work in this state. Nurses, paramedics and allied health staff are the glue of Tasmania's hospitals likewise. And the Greens are proud of the spotlight that we shone on the life-threatening failures of the Liberals who've created an ambulance ramping and emergency department crisis in all of our major hospitals. The ambulance ramping inquiry gave courageous and caring paramedics and nurses and families who were affected a place to voice their heartbreaking stories of health system failures. The failures were directly sheeted home to a decade of underinvestment by the Liberals in the real increasing costs of the health system, in no planning to recruit and retain new nurses, paramedics and allied health staff, in the incompetence and inaction that's led us now to the worst ambulance response and ED times in the country. The Liberals' deliberate choice to underinvest in health delivery for a decade has culminated in avoidable deaths and suffering, worse health outcomes for so many patients, and mental health breakdowns, enduring trauma and everyday stress for so many of our staff. We're especially proud of our work with HACSU and AMF and with grieving families to make the desperate situation of ambulance and emergency departments a state election priority. The Liberals were forced to step up, and we welcome the budget commitments that they've made to substantially increase long overdue funding for new paramedics and ambulance staff and for ambulance stations. And given the Liberals' blatant history of underspending on budget line items and the efficiency dividends that they're still planning to take from health, we remain sceptical that there will be the substantial increase in actual people on the job that's needed. And so I'm putting the Health Minister on notice that we'll be watching the employment process for these positions very closely as the years unfold. The Liberals' budget has none of the investment we need to reverse the critical health shortage of nurses and midwives, though, or the dangerous situation at the Royal Hobart Hospital maternity ward, one of just so many examples. Our alternative budget increases nurses and midwives to 480 over the forward estimates. These include community nurses, specialists in palliative care, psychiatric emergency nurses, clinical educators and clinical coaches to support new graduates. Many of our hospitals continue to lack the quality healthcare that's needed to keep people safe. We invest in 24/7 radiology and pathology services to the LGH, which the Liberals promised to fund under a coroner's investigation, but shamefully chose not to prioritise in this budget. The aim of a health system is to keep people out of hospital and well for longer. Well, that's what it should be. And to make sure that there's care in the community so that they can be discharged when it's appropriate. We've expanded allied health training and the baseline salary for these essential workers to help with that. And we invest in small rural hospitals to give them teleconference facilities. With assistance from specialist doctors and nurses for GPs, emergency patients can be assessed and managed there and take the pressure off major hospitals. And we prioritise, of course, money into community-based preventive health programs and safe drug education. Honourable Speaker, there's no way that Tasmania's hospitals are fit for purpose. They cannot meet the capacity of our patient load today, let alone in 20 years' time. Staff at the Royal Hobart Hospital recently discovered that the Liberals only planned to fund a cheap and woefully inadequate upgrade for the long-promised ED. They were appalled. When it's done, the Liberals' shortcut build won't even be able to address the patient load on the day it opens, let alone have capacity for the future. So instead of prioritising public money on a stadium, our budget includes the extra $50 million that's needed to fund the Royal ED that the Liberals initially promised. Honourable Speaker, there is a wide gulf between the majority of Tasmanians who want to see our wild places protected and our rivers and oceans kept healthy and full of abundant life, and the values and choices of Liberal and Labor politicians in this place. Both are prepared to consign species like the Maugean skate and the swift parrot to extinction in the service of short-term company profits, and that's a problem. The natural world is the source of all life, and that's ours included. It's the foundation of our brand and our touristry industry, some of the biggest employers in the state. And without healthy soils, rivers and water table, agriculture is barren. Extreme climate flood events have far worse impacts when catchments and riversides are stripped of natives and choked with weeds. The 10 years overdue State of the Environment report that the Liberals released yesterday by order of Parliament paints a dire picture of Lutruwita, Tasmania's environmental health. Nearly more than half of the major indicators show nature on our island is in a bad shape, with almost everything trending to worse. The sick state of our environment is deeply concerning, but after a decade of the Liberals in government, it's not a surprise. The Greens, community members and scientists have long recognised and spoken with alarm at the declining state of our environment. Liberal politicians have not just failed to protect our environment, the business interests of their corporate mates have supercharged them to unravel environmental regulations, monitoring systems and transparency. They've made a virtue out of gifting public land and waters to developers. Free real estate has never been easier to get if you're a Liberal Party donor. The Liberals' forest ideology and a debased RAA system have ravaged Tasmania's native forest estate and trashed ancient high conservation value landscapes that it's all being paid for by the public purse. This is an industry that can't stand on its own legs. Yesterday, the Labor leader made a commitment that brings both parties in lockstep, we believe, with a bleak vision to hyper-industrialise Tasmania. Mr Winter's vision is to fast-track developments and skip past environmental assessment processes to unleash the private sector. The State of the Environment report shows just how many challenges our island's unique environment is facing. As well as climate change, there's threatened species in decline, pollution, inappropriate development, damage caused by invasive species and land clearing, and that's just the start of the list. The State of the Environment report makes clear recommendations for the state steps forward. The Liberals should sit up and take notice, but the Premier's comments this morning were deeply disappointing. It's clear that he intends to double down with the same environment-damaging policies he's continued with, his government has had over the last decade. The recommendations in the report are measures that the Greens have been highlighting for years. And it shows the meaningful action that we need to take to protect threatened species, expand our reserves, better manage waterways, eradicate invasive species, and create more marine protected areas. And at the top of its many important findings, the State of the Environment report also shows that there's so much about Lutruwita, Tasmania's environment that we have no idea about. And that has to change. We have to monitor our life-giving soils and rivers and the waste we produce. That is an urgent priority. Our alternative budget invests in looking after what's precious, threatened and essential, including nature-based tourism, a sector that values and respects our wildness and beauty, parks protections, maintenance and infrastructure, and rangers and field officers, a massive restoration effort for wetlands and coastal areas, and support for volunteers in land care, coast care and wild care, making sure that threatened species have plans to keep them off the pathway to extinction, and resourcing to protect their habitat. Marine life preservation through establishing 10% of our coastal waters in marine protected areas. The Liberal and Labor parties are presenting a binary choice to Tasmanians: jobs or fish farming, jobs or native industry. And in reality, of course, we can do both, and we have to. A caring government would support regional jobs by transitioning the forest and salmon industries into sustainable futures that are better for our environment. Unless we do this now, the Maugean skate, the swift parrot, the masked owl and others will become extinct within a few short years. We can end native forest logging and focus on an alternative industry in the plantation estate. Honourable Speaker, the community fight to hold back the incoming tide of Liberal-funded, senseless trashing of threatened values is resolute. And the Greens stand with and salute the defiance and strength of everyday Tasmanians who make up a movement to protect what is wild and beautiful about this island. It's endured and grown over more than half a century alongside and supported by Greens in Parliament. We count the successes in the amount of public land that's been saved for wildness and for its world-renowned values, and in the momentum across the state for protecting our environment in all its beauty. Community organisations like the Bob Brown Foundation, the Wilderness Society, the Tasmanian Conservation Trust, Neighbours of Fish Farms, the Tree Project, Fishers and Walkers, the Tasmanian National Parks Association and Environment Tasmania are all an established and healthy part of our social fabric. New groups form all the time in response to local threats to high-valued, loved areas, like groups in the Dial Ranges, the Franklin Forest, the Tasman Peninsula, the Blue Tiers, Takaina, and of course, Kunanyi. And for Aboriginal people, you can never separate culture and country. And though they are loud and vocal in protesting the destruction of Lutruwita, its wild places, and we stand with them. Instead of demonising these Tasmanians, Liberal and Labor politicians should see them as the great resource they are. Good folk with energy and spirit who stand against a mindless trashing of irreplaceable values. There's no budget item, Honourable Speaker, that can adequately value the contribution of these people to the prosperity of future Tasmanians, but there should be. Honourable Speaker, this year we're spending more than the Liberals on what Tasmanians need, and we're delivering a smaller deficit. And in future years, we're funding a big expansion of essential services and critical infrastructure in a fiscally sustainable way. That's because the Greens know money doesn't grow on trees. It's all about priorities. We'd pay for our plan by ending native forest logging and winding up the loss-making Forestry Tasmania, taking back $72 million over the forward estimates. We'd set a tax on developer windfalls on the profits of rezoning land, a 1% vacant property tax, and we'd scrap the developer handouts of the Liberals. The Greens would make the big end of town pay their fair share of restoring the casino tax rate, increased rents and licence fees for big salmon. And, just like Saul Eslake recommended, we'd increase mining royalties by 40%, just in line with the national average, no more. Honourable Speaker, we'd cut funding to the cruel racing industry, saving Tasmanians more than $40 million a year. We'd abandon Minister Ellis's controversial youth strike force. The Greens would bin the Liberals' land tax reduction, the Defence Advocate, and, unlike the Labor Party who've done yet another backflip, we'd bin the Coordinator General's office as well. And not only would we expand our reserves, we'd protect our wild places by scrapping the Liberals' cable car Trojan horse for Kunanyi, the Cradle Mountain Experience, and of course, the trashing of Tarkina Coast by four-wheel drive vehicles. We'd reduce spending on roads and pay for our hospital and housing infrastructure. And of course, we would scrap the more than $1 billion Macquarie Point Stadium, a Liberal vanity project, an ode to the AFL and a millstone around the necks of a generation of Tasmanians. As usual, we expect the Liberals to dismiss this alternative budget as kooky. We know why they'd do it. Because they know change is possible and they don't want change. They want to keep business as usual, cosy deals with mates and donors. As they say, budgets are about priorities, and we hope ours are broadcast loud and clear and in stark contrast to the government's. We want hospitals, homes and schools, not a $1 billion stadium or a chocolate fountain. We want safe and prepared communities and a government that protects its people in a time of climate change while doing everything in its power to mitigate it. We want young Tasmanians to have quality education and food on their tables and not end up in a child prison. We support the Liberals' funding in their budget for the Commission of Inquiry, but we know there's so much more that needs to be done and spent on supporting children, which is why we bring forward and fund the closure of Ashley Youth Detention Centre. Honourable Speaker, last year, Ms O'Connor in her budget reply, and I want to recognise Ms O'Connor who's in the chamber with us at the moment, she accurately predicted the mood of the electorate is changing and there would be much more diversity in the next parliament. She was spot on. The Greens have returned as a party with 5 members in the House and our first MLC, Ms O'Connor, in the Legislative Council seat of Hobart. Power-sharing parliaments have become the norm, and what a great thing for Tasmania and our democracy. We just have to look at the inroads made in 6 short months since the Liberals' most recent snap election, where they do not have a majority. The warnings and fear-mongering were an attempt to prevent the power-sharing and collaboration that we've had ever since. It's a good thing governments are forced to consider the diversity of views in the community when they pass laws. And the outcomes in this short new parliament have been so positive. The Greens have made sure begging is finally erased from the statute books. People who were criminalised for expressing their true self will be able to seek justice through redress. We strongly supported Labor's move to make industrial manslaughter the crime it has always been.
Thank you.
And another of the new opportunities was proposed by the Leader of the Opposition yesterday. He's rightly called out the Liberals' pork barrelling over successive elections. Their shameful shovelling of taxpayers' money into election promises selected behind closed doors by a Liberal Party Politburo of unelected officials. Elected bribery, the Integrity Commission has called it. Honourable Speaker, the Liberals have used public monies to suit their own electoral and political interests, and often we've seen MPs and their families benefit from pork barrelling personally as well, and some of those who've benefited are still in the chamber today. It's a rot on our democracy, and the Greens have long called for it to stop. We look forward to working with the Labor Party and other members to legislate an end to this practice. It will be fairer for all the worthy groups in the community who need a hand. They'd get an equal chance to plead their case for funding. And it'd be much better for government budgets in the future. Unlike the Liberals, our integrity bodies have been gutted. Under the Liberals, our integrity bodies have been gutted and kept toothless. It's little surprise they have no real capacity to call out the Liberals' rorting and the hiding of information from Tasmanians. Our alternative budget dramatically increases funding for the Integrity Commission and the Ombudsman. Shamefully, the Liberals have walked away from their promise to fund the Vice recommendations designed to investigate and prevent child sexual abuse. And we fund this work fully as is needed by the Integrity Commission. So, Honourable Speaker, on behalf of our historic 6 Greens in Parliament, I'm proud to present our costed alternative budget, and I seek leave of the House to table it to everyone now.
Question is leave be granted. Those of people say aye.
Aye.
Contrary no. The ayes have it.
Thank you. It prioritises support for people struggling with the costs of life and for public and community sector workers who need to know that the government has their back. It puts resourcing their needs above handouts to big corporations and developers. We make a clear-eyed, unapologetic choice to prioritise funding into critical health and housing and climate resilience infrastructure. We stand up for our environment. Thank you. We stand up for our environment, and for all its beauties and wonders, we have a solemn responsibility to care for. We will protect them from corporate greed and profiteering, and from Liberal and Labor Party short-term self-interest. Ours is a real alternate vision for this island. Our alternative budget puts Lutruwita, its people and future generations first, and I'm proud to table this alternative budget with the House today.